Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our speaker series. I am Joel Capijan, Director of CERC, the Center for Enhancing the Research Capacity of Minority-Serving Institutions at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. CERC is funded by the National Institute of Justice, and our mission is to help researchers build the skills, networks, and support they need to develop strong, competitive, and actionable research programs. We believe that a key driver of that is external funding. And for that reason, this year's speaker series walk us through the full grant writing process, from finding funding opportunities to developing competitive proposals to planning for what comes next after the funder's decision. In our last session, Dr. Eric Pisa spoke on formulating strong and impactful research questions. If you were not able to join us, we'll share a link to that recording in the chat during today's session, but you can also join our mailing list or visit our website to access recordings and materials from the entire series. Today's session is entitled Crafting a Winning Proposal, and our presenters are Dr. Angela Moore and Ms. Christine Crossland from the National Institute of Justice. A few quick housekeeping notes before we begin. Today's session runs 90 minutes and will end at 1 p.m. Our presenters will speak for roughly 40 to 45 minutes, and then we'll follow up with a 20 to 25-minute moderated Q&A session. Please submit all your questions through the question box. Our center's managers, Justice and Noreen, will organize them and I'll post them to our presenters. At the end of today's talk, you'll be invited to complete a brief post-event survey. Please take a moment to fill it out. Your feedback directly shapes future talks and our programming. Now, a quick word about our great presenters. Dr. Angela Moore is a social and behavioral scientist and serves as a senior science advisor at the National Institute of Justice within the office of the Principal Deputy Director. She has provided scientific oversight for crimesolutions.gov and managed NIJ's Research Assistantship Program, as well as the W.E.B. Du Bois Program of Research on Race and Crime. She's one of NIJ's point of contact for activities related to the Foundations of Evidence-Based Policing Act of 2018, and she co-founded NIJ's Violence Against Women, Family Violence Research and Evaluation Program. Her research interests include interpersonal violence, violence against women, sentencing, corrections, reentry, and wrongful conviction. Dr. Moore earned her PhD in criminology and criminal justice from the University of Maryland, College Park, and her MPA and BS from Pennsylvania State University. We're also joined by Ms. Christine, also goes by Tina, Crossland. She is a senior social science analyst in the Office of Violence and Victimization Prevention at NIJ. Her current work focuses on gender-based violence, and she directs NIJ's Violence Against Women and Family Violence Research and Evaluation Program. Tina has extensive experience directing, conducting, and managing research with vulnerable populations, survivors, and high-risk individuals. She has also worked on both sides of the grant-making process, running research studies and standing up a research center at a university, and managing several federal grants programs during her tenure at NIJ. With that, it is my pleasure to turn things over to Angela and Tina.
Thank you, Joel. I'll just wait to get the slides up on the screen and then we'll get started. While we're doing that, I just want to take this opportunity to thank the entire team at John Jay, Joel, Josh, who's not able to be with us today, Justice, Noreen, and Davia, for all of their hard work in developing and implementing the CERC, They have been doing a fantastic job, and we look forward to more great things to come in the future. And we want to thank all of you for the opportunity to present on this topic. Thank you for having us. And I'd like to thank everyone who's joined us today for this session on creating a winning proposal. I'm delighted again to be here with my colleague and my partner in crime prevention, Tina Crossland. And we are going to be tag teaming on this presentation. Tina, we are seeing the note pages at this time.
Okay, that's what I was waiting for. Sorry. Do we have the right one?
Not yet.
Hmm.
I think you want to hit the presentation mode and then maybe make the switch from there.
Thank you. Are we good?
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, we can stay on this slide for 1 second or two because there's one other important thing that I like to do, and that is to provide our disclaimer that points of view in this presentation are those of the authors and do not necessarily represent the official position or policies of the U.S. Department of Justice. So if anything that is said that make you wonder, those are our comments and not the DOJ. With that, let's get started as we talked about crafting a winning proposal. Next slide, please. So for today's session, what we're going to do is provide a brief overview of the National Institute of Justice, which we will also refer to as NIJ or the Institute. We will also discuss the types of funding mechanisms that we use, the application and peer review processes, and then close things out with frequently asked questions. After that, we should have sufficient time for a Q&A session. Next, please. One other thing I just want to note before we start talking about who we are is that because we have notice of funding opportunities currently available, we cannot answer any questions pertaining to any of them. So who are we? The National Institute of Justice, or NIJ, is one of 2 science agencies that's housed within the Office of Justice Programs, also known as OJP. The other science office is the Bureau of Justice Statistics, or BJS. And NIJ is the federal government's leading source of funding and research to strengthen the justice system, support law enforcement, and enhance victim services. As you can see from the slide, NIJ is statutorily mandated, and we conduct basic and applied research and evaluation, and we also provide lab support. Within NIJ, we have 5 science offices that encompass 6 major research portfolios, which include crime prevention and control, forensics and investigative sciences, justice systems operations, technology, victimization, youth safety, and justice. NIJ is one of 8 grant-making agencies within the U.S. Department of Justice, or DOJ, and 6 of which are within the Office of Justice Programs. So along with NIJ and BJS, there's the Bureau of Justice Assistance, or BJA, the Office for Victims of Crime, or OVC, the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, OJJDP, and the Office of Sex Offender Sentencing, Monitoring, apprehending, registering, and tracking, which we are glad is referred to as the SMART Office, since that's certainly a mouthful. The other two grant-making agencies in DOJ are the Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services, or the COPS Office, and the Office on Violence Against Women, or OVW. I will note that there is a consolidation in process within DOJ, and that has been mentioned in the president's budget for 2027. So you can look at that and stay tuned for more details about what those changes may entail. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tina now. But I'll be back.
Thanks, Angela. I'm going to talk about the funding mechanisms for NIJ, and there are 5 primary ways of obtaining funding from NIJ. Most of our budget goes to extramural research and evaluation, primarily awarded competitively through notice of funding opportunities, or also known as solicitations, mostly to academic institutions, research organizations and firms, medical centers, non-government organizations, state, tribal, and local government agencies, and mostly through the form of a grant or a cooperative agreement. There are some notable differences across the federal science enterprise as far as types of interactions you have between applicants and those at the particular agency. At NIJ, if an award is made as a grant, investigators should not expect substantial involvement between a DOJ assigned science staff person and the award recipient, because they're considered very discretionary, except for periodic check-ins, usually during research progress performance through reviews. However, the Department of Justice grant managers will be providing active support throughout the entire process of the grant. Now, conversely, awardees with a cooperative agreement should expect a significant involvement with the DOJ science staff and the award recipient. That's usually when our science staff are working collaboratively with those investigators on substantive issues, such as participating in project activities like instrumentation development and testing. This option is especially helpful when the government has insight or access to information necessary to successfully conduct the work. And that may be, for instance, getting access to administrative data not otherwise available, or to classified information, such as maps or other types of things. NIJ also does procure research contracts in very specific cases. This is where we want to acquire specific directed research results, products, or services that directly benefit the government itself. In these specific cases, we actually procure contracts, and they are usually narrowly defined, well-defined projects to acquire tangible products, technology, or research service. But there's only a very small percentage of contracts that we currently involve. In most recent years, we have issued challenges to scientists, also available to inventors and innovators, allowing them to develop solutions to problems presented by federal agencies, where they can receive awards for the best solutions. And finally, we do have various types of agreements that we have engaged in, such as inter-agency agreements. We've used them to help support other science agencies. For instance, we've helped support the National Institute of Health's longitudinal work on adolescent brain cognitive development study. We've also funded research assistants through this process, postdoctoral researchers, and visiting scientists. And as described, we presented these in the order of flexibility. So for the next few slides, we're going to present the process for applying for grants and cooperative agreements. This presentation is primarily going to focus on grants and cooperative agreements, not on contracts and challenges. The reason for that is because contracts fall within a different type of regulation process, and they happen very rarely. And public universities and educational institutions, while often eligible, that's not something that we tend to engage in. So we wanted to focus most of our time on grants and cooperative agreements. And with that, we want to talk about the key components. While there may be some deviations, for the most part, the primary application requirements for NIJ include an abstract, a title page, the project narrative, which should be at no more than 30 double-spaced pages in 12-point font, accompanied by a budget narrative, and appendices. Altogether, most applications can have more than 100 pages, and that's a lot, including the attachment and supporting materials. However, the appendices should complement and support the project narrative, and they will be crosswalked to all the documents, which I'll demonstrate shortly. Therefore, it's really important to ensure that you submitted the appropriate appendices and that they're accurate and consistent across the entire application. Believe it or not, you'd be surprised on how many applications don't submit a title page. So please, my first recommendation is make sure that title page is there and that it's an important source of data. It includes not only the project title, but the submission date, the funding opportunity notice that's listed on the solicitation, the investigator's contact information, but it should also identify if there are any specific priority areas that the applicant wishes us to consider in our review, as well as the key words used in the topic. The abstract should be concise. It needs to be pithy. It needs to only contain information pertinent regarding the proposed study. You need to be mindful that if a particular project is funded, that information is made public. So anything that may be confidential in nature that you don't want disclosed, you have to make sure that that is described differently. So for instance, if you were going to be collecting data in perhaps New York City, Houston, and LA, but you want to keep those locations quiet, you would just simply state 3 urban sites. The abstract and the project narrative should be written in the third person, and that's very important. We also are requiring a list of all the individuals included in the project. That's all project staff, that's consultants, that's partners. That document is used at several stages of the review process to identify conflicts of interest, not only amongst the DOJ staff people, but all of our peer reviewers. We take conflicts of interest very seriously. The information in that document is used at several different points in the process to determine who can review applications, and we may have to recuse individuals or reassign work as a result. So again, we're doing a lot of crosswalks across all the materials that's provided. And we may be doing that in this particular case by looking at management plans, letters of support, organizational charts, and the like. And finally, we have the budget, and the budget must align with the research design, the staffing, the level of effort to complete the work as described. So there are 5 primary criteria areas in all of our solicitations that has become standardized. However, I really want you to pay close attention to the weights assigned to the specific sections of the project narrative. We place the highest importance on the soundness of the methods and the appropriateness of the analytic and technical approach. The assigned weight for the project design is 40%. Therefore, we recommend actually that's where you should start writing because it will be the focal point. In some cases, it's best to start the section before the others. But for the NIJ proposals, ensure that there's a valid theoretical framework that is presented and it becomes the through line for the entire project. It's important to justify the importance and significance of the work as well as the design and the analytic plan. The other categories also have weights attached to them and are important, and that includes capabilities and competencies of the team proposed, the potential impact, and the budget. One of the questions that we tend to get is how many pages you should allocate, given the 30-page limit. And what we're offering here is just a strategy. There's no hard and fast rule here. It really depends on what you're going to be doing and presenting, but we did want to kind of give you an idea of where you might focus most of your attention when it comes to writing this section. Angela, I'm going to turn things over to you to talk about the different components in more detail. Angela?
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Oh, I got muted when I unmuted. So just to expound a little bit upon what Tina just discussed as it relates to the research proposal project narrative. So you can think of it in terms of the 5 W's and the 1 H, as I say it. So if you start with the what, really, what is the purpose of this study? What's the focus? What are you trying to accomplish in this research? And that's critical. And that relates to the statement of the problem. What are we going to do in this study? Secondly, the how. What methods are you going to use? What strategy? What type of design, essentially, are you going to employ to conduct the research? And of course, that relates to the project design and implementation, and so do the where. Are you going to be doing primary data collection? What are the specific sites? Have they agreed to participate? Do you have letters of agreement or cooperation and those types of things? Or if you're going to conduct secondary data analysis, do you have the data in hand? Are there data sharing agreements in place, etc.? Tina might touch on this later on, but I'll just note that as part of a deliverable, you will have to provide NIJ a copy of the data. So it's important that whoever you're working with is in agreement that that data can be shared. Also, the when. How long is it going to take to do this study? Spoiler alert, NIJ allows, and other OJP agencies for that matter, our projects have a length that's mandated. It can only be up to 5 years or 60 months. It's only in a very rare exception could it be longer, and we have to get permission for that from on high. So just keep that in mind. So you want to make sure that the time allocated to the project comports with what you are proposing to do, right? You don't want it to be too short, and then you're having to ask for extensions unless those are absolutely necessary. And you don't want it can't be too long. It can't go beyond the 5-year time frame. And so then you have those things, your how, the where, and the when, that really comprises your project design and implementation. And then we have who. Who is going to be doing this research, and who are you doing it with, right? So you want to identify all the team members, your stakeholders, and it's critical that the individuals that you have as part of the research team are experienced, have the requisite knowledge and expertise, and they are relevant and necessary to this study? That's something reviewers will look at. There's a lot of people here. Is everyone necessary for the conduct of the study? And that's your capabilities and competencies. And certainly, last but most important, why? Why is this study important? Why should NIJ fund it? What is it? What difference is it going to make? How is it going to advance science? What impact will it have in the field? We are an applied science agency. So what difference is it going to make for practice, policy making, communities? That's critical. And those are all the things you really want to think about as you are drafting your research proposal. Next, please. So you've written everything, you've done everything you're supposed to do according to the specifications in the NOFO or the solicitation, however you want to describe it. So in order for a proposal to be accepted and forwarded for peer review, it must include the required documentation outlined in the funding opportunity notice. In most cases, this includes the standard Form 424, which is also known as the application for federal assistance. It's your front page of the application, and it contains key information about the applicant organization, such as who is the authorized representative and their contact information, the proposed project start and end dates, and of course, the amount of funds that are being requested. Other key elements include the proposal project narrative, which we've already discussed, and the budget with a budget narrative. It is critical that you read through the NOFO, as some of them will offer suggested subject matter without limiting the scope of work for a given research topic. So they may describe different areas that we're interested in, but don't limit what you can apply for as it relates to those broad topics. However, there are some NOFOs that specifically state that you can only submit applications responsive to the specified topic area described in the NOFO. So you want to make sure what I'm proposing appropriate for the NOFO, and is it within scope? Because if we say we want research on this particular topic and you decide, well, I'd like to do something else, that's not going to move forward. It's not going to pass the BMR requirement. Also, in most cases, the curricula vitae, the resumes or biographical sketches of the key personnel are also required. Again, make sure you read the NOFO to see what exactly is required, because if it's required for everyone, you want to make sure you have that document for everybody on the research team. We've seen a number of applications get kicked out because a CV or resume is missing. Upon confirmation of these documents, a review of the proposal narrative will be conducted to ensure, again, that the project is within the scope of the NOFO. I just want to point out, because we currently have fiscal year 2025 NOFOs on the street, and we hope to be releasing more soon. We also shortly will have fiscal year 2026 NOFOs that will be on the street, and those will only accept bio sketches for the applications. So again, just make sure you pay close attention to the NOFO. I highly recommend this. Before doing anything, read the NOFO from beginning to end. And then after you've done that, read the NOFO again from beginning to end. And then, you can start constructing your proposal. That way you won't miss things. But Tina is going to provide some more helpful hints as it relates to the development of your application. And with that, back to you, Tina.
Thank you, Angela. I want to emphasize the piece about rereading it. I will say that we have streamlined the templates, so it's a little less convoluted. It's not the 60-page or 30 to 60-page solicitation anymore. They have tried to condense it so it's easier and it has the most pertinent information. So I have the pleasure of talking about appendices, and I mentioned this before, that you may have the 30-page program narrative, but there's all these additional support pieces to the application. And that's why sometimes an application can be over 100 pages, and that's a lot of effort on your part to doing it, and we appreciate it. The first I'm going to talk about is the bibliography or references, whichever one you're using. We're going to make sure that that corresponds to your project narrative. So again, you're going to see me talking about crosswalking and alignment. There's going to be some keywords here. We're also going to be looking at strength of citation. Is it an outdated literature review? Are there sentinel studies that you haven't included that should be included? Is it, how recent is this information being done? And yes, we do check those and make sure that they correspond correctly. As Angela's already discussed, we will be looking for CVs, resumes, biographical sketches of the people that have been proposed for the project. That is particularly important. I have unfortunately had to deliver the bad news that somebody didn't pass the BMR because they missed one critical CV, and that crushed me as much as it did them, because I know how much work goes into submitting an application. So by all means, please make sure that you're creating a master list of all the files that you want to upload into the Just Grants system when the time comes, and that way you won't skip anything. I'm going to briefly talk about letters of support and commitment that describe the obligations or the nature of what is being supported and being provided. First of all, whatever you do, make sure that there are signatures that are applied to those documents. It could be a wet signature, the old fancy pen paper. It could be an e-signature or or a digital signature. And the reason for having that signature is we need to verify that they in fact submitted it and that it's a valid signature. Otherwise it would be considered invalid. I also want to point out that I have noted, to help with obtaining letters of support and commitment, a lot of investigators will pre-draft a template of their own, and they kind of distribute it to the individuals that they're working with, whether it's partners or people that they would like to show their support for a particular project. There's great things that can expedite, so that person doesn't have to create from nothing a document that you can provide. But if it seems like it's such a standard and it's really no personal in-depth information about what that individual organization is actually providing, I don't know that it's going to have the same weight to it. So make sure that those letters of support and commitment are drafted appropriately to the individuals that are providing them. As far as supporting the research design section of the project narrative, things that you may not have the space to provide in the narrative would be any type of draft instrumentation that you've already created, tools, a list of variables that you're going to be using, scales, tables, figures, and charts. All of that can be put in the appendices, and that way it doesn't go against your 30-page project narrative limit. In these cases, it becomes a balancing act of what needs to go into the proposal narrative versus what can go into the appendices. So keep that in mind, what makes more sense, but know that you have that option of providing additional information in the appendices. For projects that propose incentives or stipends as part of the project, a justification is required. NIJ does have requirements for that. There's a template on our website. If funded, NIJ will review those and approve the justification down the road. Other items that we're crosswalking or reviewing for alignment with the project narrative will include the project timeline and milestones, the management plan. We want that management plan is particularly important if you're dealing with multiple investigators that perhaps are at different locations. It provides us a list of the various tasks and how they're subdivided, how they're supervising, who's accountable for who. That's a very important document, and we'll be crosswalking that to capabilities and competencies. And then Angela already mentioned this, but the data management, sharing, and archiving plan is a key component that we'll be looking at. It's telling us that you're taking note of the data that's going to be collected and how you're going to collect it and how you will prepare it for submission to a approved data archiving facility. In general, anything paid with public funds should be made available to the public with, of course, restrictions on the data itself. But the intention is that we will archive all data, whether it be in a restrictive archive or otherwise, but there's only a few exceptions in which data waivers are provided. So the assumption should always be that the data itself will be provided. Angela and I have created a couple of handouts for today's presentation that's going to be made available to all the participants. And two of them that we've provided, because I know people struggle when they're asked to provide a research and evaluation independence and integrity statement. We've provided the first handout to talk about what should be in that document. And the second one, which has been implemented in the fiscal year 25 cycle, which is a statement regarding the gold standard science statement. And we've provided those to you all so that you can reference them should you be applying to NJ in the future. And lastly, is you are required to submit human subjects documentation. So as an applicant, you do not have to turn in your study to your local institutional review board for review and consideration prior to submitting your proposal. However, you do have to submit the form that says that you will, upon funding, make sure that the institutional review board reviews your study. In addition, the Department of Justice requires privacy certificates. And some of you who have applied to the National Institutes of Health perhaps are more familiar with certificates of confidentiality. They're similar, but they're different. And while we can accept certificates of confidentiality, they don't replace a privacy certificate. And the reason for that is that the regulations and statutes that we follow regarding research in many cases are much more stringent than other science agencies. And therefore we have to make sure that they have the right regulations listed. And we do have all of this information available on our website with the forms and everything needed. And I think that's all I have for this one. But again, we are providing you handouts that will provide more detailed information. So we wanted to provide you kind of a visual of a crosswalk, because I've mentioned that several times, crosswalk and alignment, and how all of this comes together. So for the next 2 slides, I'm going to give you some examples of how this all comes together. So as the peer reviewers are assessing a proposal, they're going to crosswalk information across documents. So it's important when you're pulling this all together, these documents ensure that they're accurate and consistent. Examples of problematic proposals include missing staff who are either mentioned in the project narrative, capabilities and competencies sections, but they're not listed in any of the budget documents, or there's missing a CV. Or it could be the opposite. We have CVs of somebody who's not mentioned anywhere. That actually happens quite a lot. So make sure you have somebody in there who's crosswalking all of this. Another example is something as simple as a sample. The sample numbers that you have within your project design don't match what you have in your key subjects documentation paperwork. Or in the budget, for instance, how you've allocated a number of incentives, does that actually follow up? So hopefully this matrix that we provided you could be used as the cross-check as you're finalizing your application. The other, this is just an example of alignment. So you have your project narrative and then the evidence that's provided in the appendices, which is also supported by the budget. So similar to the last slide, this is just another proposal. This is just showing you how everything aligns between the appendices and the budget, and it all comes together. It's a puzzle. And unfortunately, you don't want to have a missing puzzle piece in there because it could misalign the whole thing. Okay, we've created, for the budget section, I find through my experience, both being on campus and being off campus, what I hear a lot from new investigators when applying for grants is how frustrating it is to come up with a budget and budget narratives. It's something that they teach you. I had the fortune of working with great professors in grad school who happen to have a lot of federal grants and working with research foundations, and I was able to learn all of this. So I'm going to talk about some key areas, but one of the things, and probably the biggest recommendation I can have for all of our applicants, is it's really important that investigators work collaboratively and very closely with their departments, their sponsored research offices throughout the development process. I would do this as soon as possible so you can establish everybody's roles and expectations. It's important because it's hard to understand how personnel and fringe work. Most universities work on a structured appointments, whether it's 9, 10, and 12-month academic appointments, and they have their own restrictions on the amount of time that can be charged to grants, and that can be very confusing to someone who's never applied before. So working with these individuals can help this process. Most salaries presented in institutional-based salaries include salaries that cover teaching, research, services, but does not include summer salary, consulting income, bonuses, or stipends. And the most common salary formats are academic year, summer, and then the whole calendar year. So in grant proposals presented in terms of so in grant proposals, an investigator may request release or buyout time for, teaching or a course equivalent during the academic year. Again, work with your department, work with your school, what can be used for those things. And keep in mind, we look very closely at project devotion. If you say that you're going to be giving so much time to this particular project that makes sense for this project to come to fruition, to successfully be completed, make sure that it's not only accurate and needed, but it's also audible. And so we also want you to be mindful that if you're someone who is fortunate enough that has multiple grants, that you haven't overcommitted yourself, because as a government agency, we will cross-reference to look at someone's project devotion across projects. So you can't commit on this project for 25 and another project for 40 and another for 50 because you've already exceeded your 100% limit. So keep that in mind when it comes to, your travel. To your personnel and fringe benefits. There are some things that I think I see quite often that investigators overlook. And the first one is salary escalation and cost of living increases. So if you have a 2, 3, 4, or 5-year budget, is it allocated for those increases? Make sure that they are included. I find that sometimes that the fringe benefits are not defined, or they're using incorrect rates. So those have to be adjusted and looked for. There may be some unallowable costs, which is why we're providing you a couple more handouts available to you that will talk about what's unallowable and allowable and how subawards are handled. We also want to make sure that the budget aligns with the timeline, not only described within the project narrative, but that it aligns with the whole project from beginning to end. So for instance, if you say this is a 3-year project, but you provide us a a 2.5 year budget, there's a discrepancy there and it causes a major disconnect for us to follow. So we'll be making sure that the timeline, start dates and end dates all correspond during that time. The one thing I do want to point out that is unique to the Department of Justice grants is we tend to have a start date specified in the solicitations that may say January 1st start date. That's only contingent upon all of the special conditions being cleared prior to that date. And I can tell you that most awards have up to 60 special conditions attached, and it can take some time to get those cleared. So hopefully between the time that you're notified and in a normal year, I would say the end of September, whatever, you'll have a 3 to 4 month time period to try to get much of that cleared so you can start on time. Otherwise, you need to account that there may be a delay in start date. And think about that when you're dealing with your timeline. The other thing is, if you are going to be working with partners or co-investigators at other institutions, we will need a level of description on the budget as detailed as the one you're providing from your own institution. So just a lump sum is not going to suffice. We're going to need that individual documentation. And I know that you're going to have upcoming soon about budgets as your next hopeful session in the speaker series. So I'm not going to go into too much detail other than to talk a little bit about travel, because I find that that's an area where there tends to be some confusion. First and foremost, again, working with your departments and with your sponsored office, you first need to determine which travel expense regulations that you need to follow. That could be state, that could be federal. That has big implications on what costs are allowable and what rates you can use. So make sure that you define that and that you're using that information, and that the information that you're putting forth is directly tied to the project, whether it's data collection, stakeholder engagement, it's disseminating information from the project. And you need to specify, for instance, if you are going to a conference, to disseminate findings, the name of the conference, the location, and all the associated costs. I will tell you that overestimating or inflating travel costs will undermine the applicant's credibility, and underestimating it by not putting something in there is going to call into question whether it's even operationally feasible. So please keep that in mind. And the last thing I'll say regarding budgets is that if you forget everything else that I said up until now, the one thing is never put a lump sum number down, because it's just not going to apply. You have to be very specific in what you're requesting. So you can't say supplies 5,000 and just kind of leave it at that. It's just office supplies. We're going to want to know a level of detail, what office supplies and what quantity, how much per unit, that type of thing. And the same goes for travel. You just can't say 5,000 for this trip, 7,000 for this trip. The detail has to be there. And I know as an investigator that could be outside your wheelhouse. So please work with, your departments and your sponsored research offices. And I think they can really help you in that regard.
Great. Back to me. Thank you for all of that information, Tina. So we just wanted to provide some frequently asked questions that we get as it relates to proposals. And certainly we can elaborate on this more when we have our Q&A session. So we're often asked, what's the average project timeline for an NIJ-funded study? And to that we say, it depends, right? I mentioned before, the period of performance should not exceed 5 years. So you have that as your latest endpoint, but you need to consider the project in its entirety, from award acceptance to obtaining clearance, as Tina mentioned, to proceed, finalizing human subjects paperwork, through each stage of the research itself, until you have provided all the deliverables that is required by NIJ. Reviewers are going to look at your timeline in relation to the scope of the work, and the investigators devotion, time devoted to the project. So all of those things are going to be considered. So you want to make sure that you devote sufficient time to the study in order to successfully complete it. Tina, did you want to add anything there?
I just wanted to add that in rare occasions, and I mean rare, but it is something that needs to be considered as far as the timeline goes, that if there is intention of having one or more of the NIJ science staff much more involved in the project, and it's a cooperative agreement, and they've helped with instrumentation development, that project could be triggered by the Office of Management and Budget Paper Reduction Act information collection review process. It's something that we can't get past, and it can add significant time to a timeline. I would say the earliest you could get approval time, if everything is done succinctly without delay, is 6 months, but can be as much as an 18-month time delay. Those things are considered at the beginning of a kickoff meeting to determine how that's going to be handled. But I just wanted to add that should you ever get involved in a project that would require that, that time frame would need to be built into the project. And given a 5-year time limit, that's a very big time difference. So just keep that in mind.
Thank you, Tina. So another question we get, what's the average award amount for a grant or cooperative agreement? And to that we say an average is not a good indicator of the research we fund. For example, if it's a quantitative research, there's a substantial cost difference that's involved with primary data collection versus secondary data. There's also a substantial difference if one is going to conduct qualitative research, which is in most instances more expensive. Similarly, evaluations can be very costly, which is why we tend to fund those in phases. So you have to think about what is the type of study you're going to do, the method you're going to use, and then that should determine the amount that you request. And one of the ones, or the two, and I'll combine them, that we get often is about how many make it past, the first stage, the basic minimum requirement, and then how many awards ultimately get funded. And so as it relates to the basic minimum requirements, for the most part, NIJ rejects less than about 5% of applications outright. So of the 95% that make it through BMR, these applications are reviewed by at least 3 and often 4 external reviewers and then several internal peer reviewers. After the initial review, only a percentage of applications, around 25%, will move forward past the technical merit review. And then of those that are recommended for further consideration by the external and internal reviewers, approximately 10 to 15% of the proposals receive funding. And with that, I'll turn it back to Tina to talk a little bit about the peer review processes.
We're going to also provide another handout for you. And as we discuss this process, Angela and I'd like to share a handout that we've been providing to our external peer reviewers over the years, and we've been adding to it and expanding upon it. We found that the handout provides questions that correspond to each of the sections of the project narrative, serving as a guide for specific information that an application should include. So it's not only helpful for our external or reviewers who are reviewing it, but it also can serve and help you, and it's called application considerations, serve as a checklist to ensure that all the necessary information is included in your application packet. And I hope you find that helpful when you review that. So the peer review process, as Angela's already mentioned to you, is multiple stages. And so for external peer review panels, the panelists that we've talked about, minimum of 4, Sometimes you may be part of a standing review panel that can be up to 25, depending on the program. Panelists are selected for their expertise and the subject areas relevant to the proposal and methods. To ensure an unbiased and objective review, panelists must report all potential conflicts of interest, whether perceived or actual, and regardless of how minor they may be, and all of them are adjudicated and recorded. During the peer review, researchers assess the scientific rigor and merits of each proposal that we get. They consider the clarity and the validity of the research and determine whether it offers original and important information. We do include practitioners and policymakers into our panels who provide an up-to-date and actually on-the-ground knowledge component. It kind of puts it back into reality. We can have all these lofty ideas, but can it actually be implemented in the real world? So collectively, the panel members will read each proposal and assess the strengths and weaknesses of each application. The peer reviewers base their reviews on the criteria outlined in the notice of funding opportunity. And all of those assessments are submitted to the NIJ for review and consideration. The second part of it is an internal peer review, which is conducted by subject matters within NIJ, along with discussions with our colleagues, including partner agencies. So we're looking at impact, feasibility, originality, and the economy of the proposal. We're also going to investigate and research any questions or issues that were raised either by the external peer reviewer or by any of the in-house staff. And those questions might be, are there other projects of a similar nature that have been funded? What are our partner agencies doing on this particular topic? Has NIJ funded a project like this one before? Does the project go beyond what the research has been? In other words, is it advancing our knowledge? We're also going to be looking at performance of both the applicant organization and the investigators. They're not the same, they're different. Is your organization as a university, as a firm, has a solid history of managing grants successfully, submitting reports on time, and have the investigators themselves completed studies successfully and been able to disseminate the information. And again, just like the external reviews, those overviews are provided to the NIJ director for his or her to make decisions. And as you can see from this slide, they look at a number of different factors, including the quality, the study's impact, is it in line with the research priorities of the Institute, does it concur with administrative priorities, and of course, available funding. So now we'd like to offer some suggestions for investigators. I know I've said this several times before, and it's going to be a broken record. Please work with your Office of Research and Sponsored Projects, Sponsored Programs, Dedicated Grants Office, your department, as soon as quickly as you can. Establish those roles, work together. I will say some universities actually require completed applications 30 days before they're even due, which sounds insane, but it is the case at some places. So you want to establish those timelines and those due dates. And for the Department of Justice grants, that's important because you have two deadlines. One is your registration in the grants.gov. It typically is, usually 2 weeks before the actual application is due, but sometimes it's maybe 24 or 48 hours before that. But if you do not successfully complete that registration, you cannot submit your application. And I would hate for you to have gone through that entire process not to be able to submit the application. So please keep that in mind and work very closely with your team. I also think it's important that you kind of recruit faculty, research assistants, family members, so that they can help you as you get closer to the end, because you're really going to need some fresh eyes. I think everybody knows, even when you're creating manuscripts or you're writing, when you've looked at something and you've read something for so often, you just start skimming. And so to eliminate tunnel vision and to help identify errors and typos and logic gaps and improve the clarity, it's really good to have a fresh set of eyes towards the end of the timeline that you're working from to make sure that you can try to catch those things. The other thing is, please don't wait until a funding opportunity is released. If you have an idea, I really think you need to start working on it when the idea starts percolating, and that'll help save time, because unfortunately these solicitations are not open for very long like they used to be. They're much shorter time periods, and as you all know, budgeting time can be a problem for that. So please continue to work on those projects. And because you may not get an award the first time doesn't mean that you won't get one the next time. I find the biggest mistake is people that walk away from a proposal. I know at NIJ, we provide those external peer review comments for all of our applicants to review and consider. So use that information to improve the next time you submit the hopefully that proposal or a future one that you have in mind. And then the last suggestion I have, and Angela's going to talk about it in more detail, is become a peer reviewer yourself. I find that people who have done that, even experienced people who have gotten awards before, became a peer reviewer the first time, and just the light bulb went off and they said, I just saw this from a very different perspective, and now I know how to improve all of my future submissions. So with that, I'm going to hand things back over to Angela to kind of close things out.
Great. Thank you so much, Tina. So as Tina mentioned, we highly recommend that you serve as a peer reviewer. Even if you don't serve as a peer reviewer for NIJ, but if you're going to apply to NIJ, I recommend you do serve as a peer reviewer for NIJ, but also to serve as a reviewer with other federal agencies as well. The information that you can get from it really is invaluable. You see firsthand how the process works. You learn what constitutes a good proposal, what reviewers are looking at, what makes proposals challenging or less than fundable. And also it's a good opportunity to be able to meet scientists within NIJ or other DOJ science staff who may assist us on the process, and just learn how we do this work. Something else that I would say, we do provide a small amount of money to reviewers. So this is not, get rich scheme at all. It's maybe, provide you with a little bit of lunch and maybe your dinner. Now, in order to be able to serve as a reviewer, you need to be a subject matter expert, to have the requisite experience, education. Normally, our technical reviewers have terminal degrees, PhDs, EDs, etc. You have to be able to provide constructive feedback and write thorough assessments. And that one of the handouts that, the suggestions and the information that we provide, it gives you a sense of what you should receive and what you should provide in a review. You work with other reviewers and synthesize your comments. And it's very important that you maintain confidentiality. So we don't want reviewers to put, I served on the peer review for the Violence Against Women NOFO in, June of 2024 or something. No. And you could say you serve as a reviewer on your CV, but don't provide specific information. And of course, you are helping us to advance knowledge by serving in this capacity. Next slide, please. So other helpful hints. We do have on our webpage exemplar proposals. Highly recommend you take a look at them, and it'll just help you so you can see what a good proposal looks like. We're not saying do this exactly and you're automatically going to get funded, but just give you an idea of how to put together a winning proposal. And next, please, Tina. And lastly, you can go on our website and we'll have under the section related to funding and stuff, we'll have our NOFOs or solicitations that have expired. You can look at them, and under them, we list the awards that were funded under that NOFO. So you can see, you can get information about that. And if you want, we can't provide you with someone's application, but you certainly could reach out to the PI if you like to ask them if they're willing to share any information related to their proposal. And so with that, we hope that you have received good information, useful information, helpful information. You will be provided the recording, you'll have the handouts, etc. But regrettably, you cannot contact Tina or me to ask us questions about your application. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Joelle for any questions that you might have. And thank you so much again for being here and allowing us to share with you on this topic.
Oh, no, thank you, Angela and Tina. That was a fantastic talk. As I mentioned at the beginning, we've set some time for Q&A. So you still have a couple of minutes to drop in your questions into the question box. We do have a lot of questions, and they do not overlap with the frequently asked questions that you guys talked about. So that's actually great. While you guys do that, I'd like to make one quick plug, which is that alongside the speaker series, we've also launched the Proposal Development Playbook with Steve Robinshaw, which is a set of recorded companion sessions designed to supplement the live talks. So the idea is simple. The live sessions are going to give you the big picture roadmap, and the playbook gives you the practical tools and templates and workflows that you can put right away into your proposal. Sessions 1 and 2 of the playbook are available on our YouTube channel. And we're going to also drop the links to those in the chat. All right, so let's get to the questions if I can find them. We have plenty of questions here. I don't know if we're going to have time to get through all of those, but all right, so question 1, can you talk about strategies for making the statement of the problem compelling rather than just merely descriptive?
I'll start with that, and Tina, feel free to add. One of the things, the first thing I would say is how this goes beyond what we already know on this topic. So how are we going to advance knowledge? That's one of the things I'll say. 2, you include a little bit of the impact in your statement of the problem. Like why this matters, why this is important, because then when you get to the potential impact, you're going to expand upon it. But you should be able to say, we need to know more information about X. And that should come clearly right in the beginning. Because if you're not moving beyond what we already know, and if you're just talking generally, that's not going to help. Remember, if you go back to the percentages that Tina mentioned as it relates to that, it's short. It's a short part of the proposal, but it needs to be impactful. So it should be pithy, it should be concise, and it should grab our attention right away. This is a significant problem. Communities are grappling with it. And this is why, and we don't have answers. So we need more research in this area. And this is why we want to do it.
Completely agree. One of the few, one of the things that I learned in graduate school that were actually useful. It's was about how to craft an effective introduction, and they always framed it as a three parts. Which the first one is just creating context, then identifying the problem, right? And then identifying the solutions to the problem, which is your research, which is the proposal, which is what you want to do, and laying it out in a way that it's not 5 pages. It should be fairly short and concise. And like you say, Angela, it should have that punch, grab people in, and it should be so obvious to people what is significance about what you want to do, that they'll get it, for sure. All right. So I have another question. If you could give applicants one piece of advice that is not written in the guidelines, what would it be?
This is where I get in trouble. But so Tina knows my pet peeve. So is not knowing the difference between a principal investigator and a principled investigator. Right? Knowing the difference. But I think, I mean, it goes without saying, make sure you follow all the requirements, right? And even though we've said that, it's usually that's where most of the proposals fall apart. Something is not stated, something is missing. Somebody will spend 15 pages on a statement of the problem, and then they want to give 5 to the, your project design and implementation. That won't work. It's gonna fall. Tina, do you want to add
Yeah, I think
anything
this,
to that?
I do. I think this goes to what I said is if you could have a separate group of folks that can be around at the beginning to brainstorm against, and then have that other group at the end, because there's going to be a lot of time that you're spending on this, and remember, you need fresh eyes because things are going to start getting blurred, and it's really helpful to even have somebody who doesn't really know a lot about a topic to read something, and if they can understand it and everything seems to be straightforward, then I think you're on the right path. If you're doing this all alone and you haven't been collaborating on it, and you haven't had people just generally looking at it, there's some things that can be overlooked that you may not think about. And I have been in peer reviews where maybe the spelling and the grammar has not been really checked, and it takes away from the review. And then all somebody is errors, and they're not goes to reflect, well, if they can't write the proposal, how are they going to successfully complete this project? So it all goes hand in hand. And so I like to say, have that special group of folks that you can have to give you that, none of that tunnel vision, that can really help you along the way. And you can have them come in different phases, but it really should be a collaboration. That's the big thing I would say. It needs to be a collaboration from beginning to end.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize your strengths and your limitations. And you stress, Tina, that the importance of detailed and everything kind of being cross-referenced, but also the importance of having that vision and that goal and the objectives, right? For example, for me, I'm very good at the goals and objectives and the how to do it, but then not as good in the cross-referencing part. And so I think when I'm looking for someone to collaborate with, I need someone that is great at that, and that will check for that. Or even they kind of divide the work in that way, and then we can switch. But I think it's kind of important to know, like, what are your strengths and limitations before coming into this.
Joelle, if I may add one very important thing, you have to assume your audience knows nothing about what you're talking about. So you have to be able to succinctly convey to them what the issue is that you want to address, how you're going to address it, and what it's going to mean and how it's going to benefit the department and society as a whole. So do not take anything for granted. And as it relates to review of the application, we are always going to try to get, we may not be as successful always, but we're going to try to get the person that is the leading expert on that particular topic to serve as a peer reviewer. So if you don't know who's doing the work and you don't cite them, you know, people want to see their name in lights. So you have to provide that information as well.
Yeah, I sure do. I sure do. All right, so this is really interesting because we have two questions that are kind of the same, but from different angles. All right, and this is about the kinds of methods that people are proposing. So on one side, one person asked, there often seems to be pressure to propose mixed methods or to use the buzzword mixed methods. In your opinion, when does a mixed methods design genuinely strengthens a proposal, and when is a strong quantitative or qualitative design sufficient on their own? I'll also read the other one just to kind of keep that in mind. The other person asks, are there methodological approaches such as mixed methods, randomized controlled trials, or quasi-experimentals that tend to be received more favorably than the other? So I'll let you tackle whichever one or both, since they're both kind of related.
Well, I'll talk about the simple aspect and then I'll leave the hard part to Tina. I will say this, we're under a different administration.
Mhm.
So things that were emphasized under prior administrations may not be the focus now. Let me start with that. So I will tell you something, a hint, a helpful hint about the current administration as it relates to any projects, really. They are looking for actionable information and they want it yesterday. So that's a challenge, right? Especially if you're proposing an evaluation, they want something that's shorter rather than longer. They are interested in whatever you say is the most appropriate method to conduct your study. That's what you should be doing. It should be done well, and it should be done cost effectively and time effectively. So I'll stop there. And Tina, anything else you want to say?
I don't think so. I really think when it comes to project design, the methods that you are employing need to make sense, and it needs to do those, circle back. Remember, there's a through line. There's some type of theoretical framework that you've developed that's helping you guide this project, that actually helped you decide on how you're going to perform it and how are you going to answer those research questions. And you need to decide what are the best methods to answering those questions. And that's what we're going to be going back and looking at to see that, is the design that you have come up with going to be able to answer those important questions? What are you going to end up with? So I don't want to be flippant and say it depends again. You can't say, which one is better than the other. It really has to match what the project is, what's driving it, the theoretical framework behind it. We do get a lot of mixed method because, qualitative is important, especially when you need to get at context, and you need to provide that context in a way that's going to really help things have a better understanding of what you're getting from the quantitative data. So it's probably not the best answer, but remember, the onus comes down to the authors of the application being able to explain what they want to do, how they're going to do it, and why that's the best method. So I hope it works out for everybody.
And
go ahead, Angela.
I just wanted to say it's in in the handout that you'll get, but if you're going to do a random assignment, quasi-experimental design, or anything of that nature, it's like, please, please, please make sure you do your power analysis.
Yeah.
If you're going to look at, some type of intervention and what difference it made, please make sure you've done your power analysis so you can demonstrate you have sufficient sample size, you account for attrition, all of those types of things. If you're doing qualitative research, what method are you going to use? It's not, well, I interviewed some people that I met and then, we assessed what they said. No, qualitative research, that is a solid method to use, and you want to make sure you describe how you're doing it. So the right methods for the question that you posed is the key.
I agree. I think that the answer to most people's questions is depends, because that's what life is. It's a bunch of it's based on the context. All right, we have time for one more question, but I'm going to combine three that are very much interrelated, and then you guys can just take whichever, or all of them, or however you guys want to handle them. So one person asked, if an institution has limited research infrastructure, how can an applicant address that honestly without making the proposal seem too risky? Another person asks, how should doctoral students or early career researchers position themselves as credible PIs or co-PIs? So I think these are two sides of the same coin. And then for the sake of time, I'll just throw in this last bit, which is, one person says, Tina, you mentioned how important it is to work with your department and sponsor research office, but what do you suggest I do if my institution doesn't have a sponsor research office? So this is all about lack of infrastructure or lack of experience. How do we handle that?
Well, let me take the first one. Maybe Angela can take the second part and I can go back to the third. But when you do have, and I mentioned before, you have the two entities. You have the applicant organization, and then you have to account for the principal investigator. And when you have someone perhaps, or an institution that hasn't received a lot of federal funding, I think you need to state that, because it'll be evident upon the forms that have to be completed. But the best way to account for that is, how are you going to mitigate that? Because that could be considered a risk factor. So what, as an organization, are you going to do to ensure that all the reporting requirements and everything is going to be done according to what the regulations are? And you can like, we're applying this much of time, and that we're going to make sure we handle our financial training that we're required to do, that we intend on submitting all of our reporting on time as specified. So you're telling them that I acknowledge when certain things are going to be due and what is due, and then who's going to be responsible for that. And then the investigators, of course, are going to talk about what they're going to do and how they're going to work hand in hand to make sure that this project can be completed successfully.
I would just add, as it relates to doctoral students or new investigators, early career, et cetera, couple of things. One, we do have currently on the street our graduate research fellowship NOFO. So take a look at that and consider that, because that's a good way to start. A lot of our investigators have started with our fellowship programs, and then they've advanced as they increase their tenure in the field. So that's something. And then another suggestion is that maybe in the first go around, you might collaborate with someone who's more senior, more experienced in the field, who has been successful with receiving federal funds. Mm-hmm. So you do that, you get your one award or two awards under your belt, and then you're like, hey, I can put on my application that I have received federal funds before and successfully completed the project or projects with these individuals. I know what to do, I can do it. And again, as Tina said, adding those things that demonstrate to the government that you've thought about it and you're ready to branch out and to take this on yourself with the support of your institution. And you can talk about the support you do have. That's important too. So I'd recommend that as well.
100%. And I'll just add third suggestion, which is to watch the proposal development playbook, where Steve actually talks about that and the resources that are available to you outside of your institution as well. Angela, Tina, thank you very much for your time and a fantastic talk. We really enjoy having you today. Before we close, a friendly reminder to please complete the brief post-event survey. Your feedback is going to help us improve future talks and as well as programming offerings. And we really appreciate you taking the time. And looking ahead, our next session is on Tuesday, May 19th from 11:30 to 1 p.m. We'll hear from Dr. Karen Terry, who will walk us through the budgeting and financial management for grants. Please help us spread the word to your colleagues and networks. Thank you again for joining us today. We are excited about our mission and about the speakers and the events still to come. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.